Hi, welcome back to the comfort table. I'm Teal. This is Cian.
Hi.
How did you find our Chinese in the previous video? I am so glad we can speak English. Today's video would kind of follow up on our previous video, where we would like to talk about our languages and how easy it is to switch between languages and whether there are any challenges being a bilingual or knowing more than
One language.
Actually, Kian, I thought you would be more comfortable in the previous video and, switching the intro, outro, because you actually do speak Mandarin more often than I do.
Yes. Okay, so maybe let me just start off by saying what languages I speak and my general proficiency in them. Like I speak English and Chinese or Mandarin. I learned both of this in school, which Teal does also because this is the norm in Singapore. Yeah. So I speak Chinese at home, especially when I was young. Nowadays we speak a bit of English, and then especially to my siblings I'll speak English. When I'm not deliberately trying to speak entirely Chinese, I don't force myself to think in a particular language. So maybe 70 to 80% of the time, most of the thoughts have been English and then some of it have been Chinese. And usually what happens is that I would just have missing vocabulary from different languages. It's not like one single language, and then there'll be singlish and internet slang mixed in. So me trying to speak specifically only in Mandarin and to you who I only usually speak English to is very taxing on my brain. So after that, right, switching back to the outro where I speak only English, speaking only in one language just requires brain power. So switching from one mode of doing that to another mode of doing that requires more brain power than I thought I needed.
Especially when your brain has categorized this as the speak English person.
Yes, you are indeed now a speak English person. My English sounds weird right now to me.
After you've listened to yourself speak Chinese for...
Yes. So the start of the Chinese video, I found myself sounding weird because I was speaking Chinese. Then towards the middle, I was a bit more comfortable. And then switching back, I was like, oh.
Thankfully, I don't have that because I always feel weird speaking Chinese.
So how it was... Okay, so maybe you can introduce what... I think we've spoke about it briefly in the hobbies video, but maybe you can share again what languages you speak and then yeah.
So Kian, I speak English and Chinese, which I learned in school. But unlike Kian, I actually don't speak Chinese at home. My dad would try to speak Chinese to me, but I'll just reply him in English. Yeah, I don't think that was very helpful in creating an environment to nurture my Chinese skills.
Right.
At my previous workplace, I did use Chinese to speak to my mainly Malaysian co-workers. I guess when I'm with them, my Chinese sort of gets more of a local accent.
So just now when you were speaking, I did notice that you tend to have a bit of Malaysian intonation in your speaking, which I thought was a bit strange because I don't recall you having that in the past.
So it's a recent development
because of speaking to co-workers.
Right. So besides English and Chinese, I also know Japanese, which I picked up in university for fun, and then I used it at work. Now I'm also learning Swedish, but my Swedish is like
a kid's.
Even worse than a kid's, I think. Yeah.
You used to learn Malay.
I used to learn Malay, so I actually have a cert that says I am proficient in Malay, but I forgot all of it. So, they always say if you don't use it, you lose it, and I think that is very true.
Yes.
So when I started learning Japanese, I was very determined not to lose it. So I specifically found a job where I would need to use it.
Honestly, it's very easy to lose. Even Chinese, which I've learned since a kid, it's very easy to lose. I used to be better at Chinese. Obviously, I was better when I took my exams, which was 12 years ago now. Sometimes I get quite embarrassed when people tell me that my Chinese is quite good. They're not lying per se. When I speak to people who primarily speak Chinese, I think I'll just adapt to them. It sounds a bit more natural. But I think I come across as being better at Chinese than other people, and that's not necessarily a good thing because the standard of Chinese in Singapore is actually quite low. If you just ask regular people on the streets who are ethnically Chinese to speak Chinese and they're Singaporeans, chances are their Chinese is not that great. It's not uncommon. So I don't feel particularly proud for being told that my not great Chinese is good or better.
Yeah, so I think I'm a good example of that. I went to a school that supposedly is good in Chinese.
Right, in the sense that a lot of people came out of the school with like A's in both English and Chinese.
Yes,
right?
and
Had a
there's
very
this
high
there's this
rate of
stereotype
pass.
that the students from that school speak good Chinese or are good at Chinese.
Chinese.
Yeah, but when I was in there, they did split us up according to our abilities, and I was, I guess, in the bottom 10%, 5% of Chinese ability. I still scored higher than most of Singapore for
Yeah,
the
because
national
we have the
exams.
national exam. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I rate my own Chinese as being really shitty, and I am supposedly above average,
So I think
I really don't feel above average, to be
I
honest.
think that there's a bit of a difference. I took both Chinese and higher Chinese, whereas
I
Teal
took only higher Chinese.
Yes. The difference back when we took it was that higher Chinese did not have an oral exam, only 2 written papers, whereas for Chinese there was an oral exam and I think 2 written papers as well. So I had to take an oral exam, whereas a lot of the higher Chinese students did not, which I found it very strange because it's like I think spoken Chinese is the part that a lot of people in like better schools trip up at. Like they can copy and they can write, but they cannot speak. So that's the weird part. Whereas if you go to like other schools, their level of spoken Chinese is better than their level of written Chinese. So unfortunately, it doesn't serve them as well in exams. Judging somebody's Chinese abilities by their spoken
Only they're spoken or written.
is a bit inaccurate. Yeah. Which I think the exam at the time is a bit unfair. I think nowadays higher Chinese does have oral, if I'm not wrong.
Not sure. It's been more than 10
Yeah,
years.
so
like
so
you
I'm not
said.
entirely sure, but like the fact that they took out the oral component of it makes quite a big difference in this phenomenon, I feel, because written is very different.
But in my case, I think I was just shitty because even my written essays and like comprehension questions,
yeah,
they were terrible. Yeah, but I guess that's because of the environment I grew up with. I didn't really have much exposure or interest in consuming Chinese media.
yeah, I think if you consume Chinese media, it will really help. The thing that really helped me reading manga in Chinese, like that was my entertainment. I think that helped a bit in like improving my Chinese.
Yeah, but
honestly
that
speaking.
being said, I don't think you have to consume media to become proficient in a language. Like, you can also just study the language and get proficient, because that's what I did for Japanese. I didn't really read any books.
You
I don't
continue
know, like
consuming
novels, mangas.
anime though.
Yes, but as for reading, I didn't really read anything besides the textbooks or like the text
Right.
materials, the teaching materials. I survived, or that, supported me all the way until I got N1.
The minimum level you need for working is N2, right? So
Yes.
N1 is higher than that.
Yes.
Right.
And it was actually only after I passed N1 that I started reading books, which is really quite funny because I guess most study guides or like most advice is that you should read media at your proficiency level. But for me, the things I wanted to read were too difficult for my proficiency level, so I just didn't want to read anything until I could
Reach that
read.
level.
Yes, until I reached that level.
I guess because it's a language that you're starting from scratch, in a sense, right? Because I'm not like intentionally starting a language from scratch, for example. I did learn like Japanese and Korean in uni, like the level 1 course, but I never really gone past it, and like I've forgotten most of Japanese right now. For Korean, I can like somewhat understand some things. I can't really speak it very well. Yeah, even listening, I'm not like that great. I find it very difficult to put in the effort to keep learning a language, right? So mostly what I've been doing, if anything at all, is like really just trying to like reclaim my Chinese ability. And even that I find really difficult. The only period that I do speak Chinese is like at home with my parents, and even then we have to make a very conscious effort to not mix in English. Actually, what I'm very curious, and I always like to ask people who can speak multiple languages, is what language do you think in, and does it change depending on the language you speak?
Yeah, so I don't really think in words, I think in like meanings of concepts. So you can imagine like this is the meaning or the concept, and then which language I choose to speak it in is like an outlet from this, like, let's say it's a reservoir. And so for English, let's say the outlet is like super big because my vocab is plentiful. And then Chinese is a bit smaller. And then Japanese is probably around the same size as Chinese. And Swedish is like this tiny straw. So I mean, that's how I visualize it when you ask me that question.
Yeah.
Because I don't really think in a language. Yeah, it's only when I choose to express myself that I sort of choose which channel
In your own head, your thoughts are just in like meanings and concepts.
or like images, I guess.
So they come in a few forms, but not necessarily language.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like very different. So I've asked this question quite a few times to different people before. I've asked it to our uni friends before, and like the interesting thing to me was that like out of our group of like maybe about 10-ish people, everybody taught in English mostly. I think most people taught in English, and I think only one of our friends still thinks in Mandarin and translates everything to English, which is very difficult. I sort of had a problem when I was really young. Like the childcare that I went to, like the teacher spoke more Chinese, and the Chinese level was much better than the English level. So I did learn English, I think, but I don't recall any of it because I remember in primary one I was struggling so hard with like English. Like it didn't show in the schoolwork, but like I was like, what's my teacher saying? And honestly speaking, I was just a very blur kid. I used to think a lot in Chinese, and then at some point it switched and became English. But when I was asking this question to most of my friends, who say they mostly think in English, and then if they need to, they translate to Chinese for some of them, and then some of them would just think in Chinese when they speak in Chinese. I kind of do that, and my default language is a mix of whatever languages I know. So it's like, if this is the pool of all the words and concepts I know in all the languages that I know, including the ones I only know like a bit of. So if this is the whole pool, this is the whole pool that I use to make my thoughts. So everything that comes out is a jumbled mess. Obviously, because I know more English, this pool has like a higher percentage of English words in it, right? And English concepts and English sentence structures. And then the next would be Chinese, and then like probably singlish, and like a little smattering of Korean and Japanese, right? So I included Singlish in there because like from Singlish there's probably like random like Malay or dialect words, but I don't know what language they are in, so that's why I just use Singlish to encompass it. So majority of my thoughts are in English. If I don't filter myself, and if I know like the other person can understand what I'm saying, I would be more free to say whatever comes to mind in whatever language.
So what happens among our friend group is that they will speak Chinese, but I don't speak Chinese to them, I just reply in English.
Yes, so this is a very common thing in Singapore, I would say. But I do have this problem sometimes, which I'm quite consciously aware of, and I try to catch myself doing it, which is that like when I speak something, try to explain something in English and they don't get it, sometimes if I explain it to them a few more times in English and they still don't quite get it, at some point my brain is like, I give up, let me try and tell you this thing again, but in Chinese. I've already told them like in English one time, in English a second time, English a third time, and then maybe Chinese a fourth time, right? So you have 4 examples of trying to explain the same thing. So like, I think for most people you understand what's going on by then, right? I think the part that's a bit uncomfortable is like when the other person is not able to understand Chinese and I accidentally do this. I do try to catch myself doing it because the majority of people in Singapore are Chinese. A lot of Chinese speaking people assume or like they forget that people don't understand Chinese. I see a lot of lecturers or teachers doing this also.
Yes, I do think it's a bit inconsiderate when people switch to Chinese when there's obviously a person who doesn't understand Chinese in the group.
And I think it's not fair to assume that all Chinese looking people know Chinese either. I mean, besides the fact that we've mentioned that some people are not very good in Chinese due to, you know, whatever reasons and their backgrounds. It's not a good thing to do when like the language of instruction is meant to be in English. But I think it's also very common during work. If a bunch of people are able to speak another language, be it dialect or Chinese, that they would do it. So I've also worked with people who are of an older generation, and then sometimes they'll just break out in dialect and I'll just sit there and I'll be like, honestly, it's not a good feeling.
It's kind of discriminatory.
It is. I'm sure it's one of those microaggressions that people
Yeah.
feel. Because I feel that when people speak dialect around me and I don't understand. Do you want to return to the start when we were talking about switching languages?
The other thing that happens is, so for example, I know the names of like certain vegetables or certain animals or
Yes.
something only in a certain language.
Yes, I have that problem too. There are some vegetables that I don't know the name of in Chinese, and I'll probably not be able to buy them.
Or like
At the
fish
supermarket.
names.
Yeah. And like trying to match, right, what the word is in different languages is a huge pain sometimes. Because like they don't always match like 1:1.
So for example, when I order sushi or sashimi, I look at the Japanese menu. Because they have, for example, they have different words for the same fish depending on which stage of growth the fish is at. So the young
Right,
fish, the
right.
adolescent fish, the adult fish are all called different things, but they're the same fish.
And it gets translated in a simplified, like there's a loss of information in the
Yes,
translation.
yes. So I just
Read the
Japanese
Japanese version. I sort of do that when I watch Korean shows with like English subtitles, where I will hear like whatever I can understand, I'll use it to supplement the subtitles because the translation is never like perfect, and like I don't understand perfectly either. That's why I'm doing both.
Have you ever thought of watching, for example, Korean shows with Korean subs? Because apparently that's
The best way to
the best way to
right?
learn by like full
I think
immersion.
I have tried. So I think the problem is that it might be easier if you're watching like dramas where everybody speaks in like perfect, like standard Korean, for example. But then I don't particularly watch dramas, and also if I do, right, usually it's like detective or some sort of like psychological shows where there's way too many technical terms that like it just doesn't really make sense. Like it doesn't even make sense to me in English, let alone Korean, right? Like the psychological terms, psychopath, for example, and then they try and explain like, what the condition is, blah blah blah. That kind of thing is like I don't even fully understand it in English. Mainly, I consume like content related to K-pop idols. So when they're speaking, they do not speak like proper formal Korean because there's always like internet slang mixed in or like their
So it's more like
audio
a
may be
talk
quite
show.
bad. Yeah, so there's like
Kinda.
talk shows or variety shows, and then sometimes it's just like those behind the scene videos that they take. So the downside to that is that sometimes the audio is not great, even though there's always subtitles, but I can't read fast enough without being able to hear exactly what they're saying as well. And then the bad thing about that is that then my pronunciation will also get skewed by how they speak, because obviously they're not like actors or newscasters where you
They're
know
not the textbook pronunciation.
in a way then that gets you closer to speaking like a native, I guess. But then it's kind of like saying you will learn Singlish by speaking to people entirely only in Singlish, and then you just pick up like weird stuff. Like every time I watch those videos where people try and teach people how to say stuff in Singlish, I feel like la is the one that always appears, and I feel like it doesn't fully encompass.
It
Like just adding a la to the end of a sentence
Yeah.
doesn't make it Singlish, because the way you say the la
the
changes.
sentence construction itself also changes.
The sentence construction itself changes. Just adding a la to the end of your sentence makes it awkward.
Maybe we should do a video in only Singlish in the future.
I think that would be a pain because English is a very truncated language, and then like our translations will fill up like majority of the screen. I like Singlish for its shortness. It's like, have you eaten? Then you'll be like, eat already? Or eat liao ma. It's a very efficient language. So like most of the time when people translating Singlish, it just expands everything. It's like 3 words become like a huge long sentence. I was gonna say the one thing that always confuses me is Hong Cha, which direct translation would be red tea, but actually it is black tea. It's referring to black tea. And then another one which I still don't really understand is brown sugar.
Brown sugar.
Right? So brown sugar is what it's called in English. In Chinese, it is usually called 黑糖, which direct translates to black sugar. But there are also places that translate it as 褐糖, which directly translates to brown sugar. There are also apparently different types of sugars. And like, they all mean different things because in Chinese, there's a lot of types of sugars. You know, like this is my gripe with knowing different languages. Like they don't
really
match one to one, right? And I just get very confused. Like, if anything, the Hong Cha black tea thing is neater because it's like direct. It's just that the color is wrong. But then like the sugar thing is like, oh my gosh. Yeah, and there's more, but nothing comes to mind at the moment. I don't know. I feel like I only know what I only know, right? So I feel like my concept of it is always shaped by the fact that I'm bilingual, and like I feel like a lot of other people's discussion of it in a lot of these like language spheres are shaped by the fact that they're monolingual.
Yes.
Right, and like the differences between thinking about additional languages when you're monolingual and when you're bilingual is very different. But even I think there's a lot of blind spots I don't see just because I'm bilingual. Because to me, this is my default state of being, right? Sometimes I wonder whether like we're really very constrained by what languages we speak in. I guess we've rambled on for long enough.
Let us know if there are any polyglots out there or bilinguals out there.
Okay, so that's all for today.
Yes. See you all next time.
Bye bye.
Bye.